Systematic failures by British customs officials have allowed criminal gangs to defraud the European Union of at least £2 billion in just 4 years, plus billions more in lost VAT. So says OLAF, that's the EU's anti-fraud bureau, which, in an exclusive interview with the BBC, reveals that around 80% of customs evasion takes place at British ports, mainly Dover and Felixstowe. Our investigation shows that much of the fraudulent business is being carried out by a Chinese criminal network. Andrew Hosken has this report.
We source the leather separately from that factory. We supply the leather to the factory.
7 years ago, Nevin Juretic and his wife Ronnie fulfilled a long-cherished dream by going into business on their own.
So these are all iPhone cases and
Yeah.
what have you? Right, OK.
So UPS is coming here today.
They're the postal people.
From their Sussex home, they dispatch cases for mobile phones and tablets, among other things, which they sell online. Business is good, but it used to be a whole lot better before ruthless Chinese racketeers moved into the market.
We were doing about £50,000 to £60,000 a month, and within 4 months we dropped down to like £21,000 a month. Over the last year, we had to completely reinvent our business model, which is why we set up our own brand, so that we wouldn't have to compete directly with the Chinese selling like-for-like phone cases.
Nevin Juretic is convinced that criminal rackets operating from China are systematically evading taxes like VAT and customs duties, and are even using huge warehouses called fulfilment houses to store and distribute their goods across Europe. He says the rackets are causing huge economic damage to the UK and the rest of Europe.
We think it's organised crime straight from China all the way into the fulfilment houses which are dispatching the goods in the UK. Now, everyone's involved along the supply chain. There's a lot of people involved. There's the people who are dispatching the goods in China, the people who are collecting the goods in the UK, and the people in the UK are then forwarding those goods onto the fulfilment houses. It's the fulfilment houses who are sitting there dispatching goods for VAT evaders. So the whole of the supply chain is a fraudulent supply chain.
And to blame for this, according to Mr Juretic and other British businessmen we've spoken to, is none other than Her Majesty's Customs and Excise, HMRC, the taxman to you and me.
In Joseph II Street in central Brussels stands the headquarters of the Office Européen de Lutte Antifraude, or OLAF, the European Office for the fight or struggle against fraud. Here, in this tall office block of brown marble and tinted glass, 420 or so officials work to protect the budget of the European Union against fraudsters and criminal gangs.
Here I met Ernesto Bianchi, OLAF's Director of Investigations of Fraud, Corruption and Customs. In an exclusive interview, Mr Bianchi said criminals were exploiting an enormous black hole in Europe to avoid paying billions in customs duties and VAT. And that black hole is the United Kingdom, and to be precise, Her Majesty's Customs and Excise.
In the last year, we have seen now a concentration of the fraud pattern, and we've calculated that roughly 79.9, so 80% of the losses in customs duties are made through declarations made in UK ports.
That's a big amount of money. So what are we talking about in terms of the losses that have been incurred, both in customs duties and VAT over the last 4 years?
We've calculated the customs duties to amount for the last 4 years, so 2013, 14, 15, 16, to almost €2 billion, so that's 1.98 billion euro. Related to that, we've estimated losses of VAT for about 3.2 billion euro. These are estimates, of course, because the fraud is perpetrated by a particular type of scheme where the companies actually disappear. And we've only had to make an average calculation of these losses, bearing in mind also that VAT rates differ in the member states and that the goods were travelling to other member states. So these losses were mainly made outside of the UK on continental Europe. At the beginning of this investigation in 2013, 2014, the UK ports were part of a series of hubs that these fraudsters were using to get their goods into the EU. Over time, because of lessons learned and more effective controls that were put in place in other member states, we've seen the traffic actually through the UK increase substantially. So we've seen over time traffic moving away from other hubs in other member states towards the one in the UK.
So Britain really is the Achilles heel.
That would appear to be the case.
So, according to OLAF, that's a loss of more than €5 billion just on clothing and footwear, mainly from China, in just the last 4 years. OLAF knows the rackets involve clothes from China, but says it doesn't know the identities of the mastermind importers behind the illicit smuggling and tax-dodging networks in Europe. But businessmen here in the UK say it's clear that Chinese importers as well as exporters are involved in the rackets that evade billions of pounds in customs duty and VAT. I met businessman Richard Allen from the pressure group RAVAS, Retailers Against VAT Abuse Schemes.
We were approached by a European police force who had impounded a large volume of goods from China, and they told us that the freight forwarder and the warehouse that was holding the goods in the EU were involved, and they were Chinese owned. So it seems to be a very professional setup.
This racket is a Chinese racket that's being run by Chinese exporters and Chinese importers and Chinese warehouse owners here.
Yeah, and it appears to be that they've found an Achilles heel in that the UK is a weak spot, because once you bring this stuff into the EU, then it can be sent around the EU without having to go through any kind of customs checks again. So, for instance, if you've got it in a warehouse in the UK, you can sell it to any member state directly, and it will not pass through any customs checks. So once you're in, then you're up and running, really.
The Port of Dover is vital to British business.
A recent promotion film for the Port of Dover emphasising its huge importance to the British economy.
It handles up to 17% of the UK's trade in goods.
And yet investigators in Brussels say it's principally British customs in Dover, as well as Felixstowe, that are being exploited the most by the racketeers. For example, the average value placed by customs officials across the EU for cotton women's trousers is around €26 a kilo. Yet the average value declared at customs in the UK has been, apparently, just under €1 at 91 cents, much less even than the cost of processed cotton.
In Brussels here at OLAF, the independent anti-fraud organisation, there's surprise, bemusement and disappointment that the UK is not using a system of methodology that officials here say has proved effective in exposing organised customs fraud.
For OLAF, this failure by HMRC to adopt the risk analysis system is particularly inexplicable because the UK used the methodology successfully back in 2014 during an exercise called Operation Snake. Again, OLAF's head of investigations, Ernesto Bianchi.
The British used this methodology in 2014 during Joint Custom Operation Snake. In 4 weeks, they could detect fraudulent activity going on in harbours in the UK that led them to try to recover an amount of roughly £400 million.
£400 million in just 1 month?
Correct. That's what they found out. Yeah.
So the British have had success by using this methodology?
The British have detected fraudulent traffic in the ports. They haven't been successful in recovering the money, which is unfortunate, but it's also probably linked to the type of fraud, which is based on volatility of the existence of the companies and that the traders and the importers disappear.
Well, this highlights the issue for legitimate businesses in the UK and for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. I've come to a rather nondescript industrial estate in Stockport in Greater Manchester. Now, I've been told that a fulfilment house, a big distribution warehouse, is both storing and helping to distribute the stock of tax-evading Chinese importers. And guess what? The birds appear to have flown. There is no longer a fulfilment house here. Instead, there's a sign showing that this particular unit is now being let out.
The UK could soon be presented by the EU with a bill for the lost customs duty estimated at just under €2 billion. But that could be the tip of the iceberg, say businessmen in the UK. There's increasing evidence that tax-dodging racketeers are not just dealing in clothes, but in a wide range of goods.
This is our main warehouse in Denton, East Manchester.
In Manchester, I met Richard Storer, Finance Director of Qualtex, a company supplying mainly spare parts for domestic appliances.
It affects Qualtex in the sense that if people aren't paying VAT, then obviously they can sell at a lower price than we can sell at. So in that instance, it's anti-competitive. Certainly what we see, because of the industry that we operate in, a lot of it is coming from China. So a lot of goods in our industry are manufactured in China, and hence obviously that enables them to manufacture there and import. Where we see it, it is predominantly Chinese sellers that are causing the issue, yes.
Some say that HMRC is not fit for purpose and is simply unable to deal with the fraudsters, apparently costing the country and the EU billions in lost revenue. Richard Murphy is a lecturer and accountant who's long campaigned against tax evasion.
Well, there are a number of ways in which we can be fairly confident that the UK is not equipped to deal with this. One is the fact that the Revenue have got rid of most of their skilled staff. In 2005, when Customs and Excise, which used to be a customs authority, it focused upon this issue of imports and exports in particular, was merged with Inland Revenue to form HM Revenue and Customs. We saw a complete change in the mentality of the organisation. And one of the key objectives of the new directors was to get rid of staff. And in fact, they've got rid of half their staff since 2005. Now, of course, some of that is natural wastage. But the reality is they've got rid of a lot of the senior staff as well. They aren't even training staff to be fully qualified tax inspectors anymore. So the staff they've got are not as well trained, and they're being concentrated in fewer and fewer offices, many of which are a long way from ports.
We put the points made by Richard Murphy, OLAF and the businessman to HMRC, which refused to answer them, saying only that its experts did not recognise OLAF's estimate of evaded customs duty. HMRC plans to challenge OLAF on its sums, and a spokesman said there would be no further comment while this challenge was ongoing.
Andrew Hosken reporting.